Okay, so I think I have met many of you before. I'm Karen Hasher. I'm the program manager of the Tamer Fund, and I am very interested in today's session. I'm looking forward to learning about partnerships and very excited about our guest speaker today, Professor Weiss. He's had a great deal of experience building and running companies and serves on corporate boards, and has also received numerous awards for business leadership, including the Botwinick Prize for Business Ethics from Columbia Business School. Professor Weiss is also a CBS alum and has taught entrepreneurship here from, I believe, 1998, if that's correct, 1998, all the way up to this past spring. So I feel very fortunate to have him here today. So with that, I am going to let Professor Donald Weiss take it away.
Okay, so they had to reach into the retired professors, but I've been doing this for 25 years at CBS, and love every minute. My background is that I was in the corporate world, built a business, sold a business, retired, and somehow got recruited by Columbia to teach entrepreneurship, which I did for 25 years. And I still do things. And in fact, just hosted, I don't know if any of you were there, but I did an armchair interview with Bobby Brown, the cosmetics Bobby Brown, one of my entrepreneurs and a dear friend, at the Lang Center on, I don't know, October 24th or something like that. We had a couple hundred people, and it was a lot of fun. We talked about partners. So having taught at Columbia for 25 years and taught entrepreneurship in a class where I basically invited a guest entrepreneur in each class and for a part of the class, and then we analyzed what we learned from the entrepreneur, and then we also covered a variety of subjects. In 25 years of doing this, I can tell you unequivocally the single biggest mistake that CBS students who start businesses make is they mess up the partnership right from the get-go. In general, the biggest mistake that people make in starting businesses has to do with hiring and people, but even more so with partners, which is really the very first step. Who's forming the business and who is the business? So
would you like me to share your presentation yet?
Yeah, you can put up the first slide.
Okay.
So I'll talk to it, and we'll get going. This is just one that I've used over the years, that I find to be quite true, because the truth of the matter is that most partnerships really don't work. And most partnerships really wind up with a situation where one partner feels he or she did more than their fair share of work. And even in successful businesses, we have this situation. So I really believe that the lessons that I'm going to talk to you about now, and the method I'm going to give you to address things, can really help you avoid what I believe is the largest mistake that CBS startup businesses make. And I will give you some real examples. So let's put up my first real slide, which is a shared vision and values. If you're going to begin a partnership with anybody, and by partnership, I mean someone else who's going to have equity in the business.
I'm sorry?
Good.
You can go here first, and then, yeah. Actually, no, it's fine. You're right. Maybe you can start here. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're going to start a business with someone else who is expected to have equity, the one thing you you need to do is be sure that both of you, or three of you, or four of you, or many there are of you, have a shared set of vision and values. And this is critical because if you don't, the obvious is that the people who work in the business and the business itself will be very confused, and people won't know what direction to take. Vision of where the business is going, the values that you share, which generate the culture that you're going to have, must be shared by all the partners. And the first warning sign is if they are not, then you're looking at a dangerous partnership. So the second thing that I would mention to you is that, and it's kind of obvious, that it's generally speaking best to have complementary skills. It's generally speaking best not to have three marketing people, but if you've got a marketing person, a financial person, and a technical person. I mean, that's typically the way partnerships are created, not two technical people and a financial person. So I would think that while it's best to have complementary skills, it doesn't always have to be the case. There can be multiple, two of you can have marketing skills, and then it just becomes an issue of turf. But it's best if everybody has defined turf that they work in. But it's important that even though they may have different skills, that they have a common work ethic. That is extremely important. So the other thing, the third thing that I would bring to your attention is that the partners have to have shared expectations of what the business is going to be and what we're trying to do here. There are topics like, should we give equity to employees? Where should we be located? Should we grow fast or should we grow slow? There's all kinds of things. What's our exit strategy? What's our end game? If one partner is in it to be out in 5 years because he or she wants to sell the business, and then the other partner says, this is my life, you have issues. So partners should have shared expectations. I think that's very important. The next thing I would mention to you is that partners should have an appreciation for each individual's contribution. I have been involved in situations where there was maybe a financial partner, a technical partner, and a marketing partner or sales partner. And the sales guy or the marketing guy's running out around the country, going to LA, going to London, having fancy dinners. And, the other two partners back home with their nose down on the desk are saying, hey, this isn't fair. He or she gets all the fun, meeting all the customers, doing this and doing that. And, that's a source of friction with partners. So the point is, you really have to understand every individual's contribution, and you have to keep things professional and businesslike. So the truth is that different people have different roles. I mean, the technical guy could be staring out the window and looking like he's doing nothing, but could come up with the greatest, most patentable idea imaginable. So you have to have an appreciation for what each person does, and you have to have a respect, and there has to be some mutual respect for everybody's skills and discipline. And I've seen businesses where there isn't, and there's jealousy, and that begins the end of the partnership. So next, you want to partner with people you enjoy being with. Now, this seems obvious. I mean, come on, you have to go to business school to hear a statement like this. But I can't tell you how many times a partnership broke up or a business came apart, and one of the owners says to me, I never liked him. I never this, I never that. Well, if you never liked him and you never got along with him, then why the hell was he your partner? So I tell you, it seems obvious that you should only be partners with people you enjoy being with, but it's not so obvious. And a lot of people accept things that they find objectionable, and I think they pay for it later on. Next, responsibilities and exit strategies need to be defined in writing up front. If there is one single thing you get from this class, and I will tell you that, and I think it was Garrett who spoke before, if there is one thing that you get from this class or any class on partnerships, it needs to be that the partnership has to be spelled out in writing up front. It's very interesting. I was on a train to Boston on Monday. I sat down in an assigned seat next to a girl who was a lawyer in the insurance business, she owned her own claim business, and had a partner, and started telling me the story of her partner and what a horrible partnership it was, and how glad she was they were able to dissolve it, and apologetically saying we were both lawyers and we had nothing in writing. Shame on her, shame on you, shame on anyone who does not put the partnership in writing. Now let's talk about that. You must have what is called a partner's agreement. That you're ahead of me there,
I'm
Karen.
ahead. Okay, sorry.
You
Okay.
must have a partner's agreement. It's called a partnership agreement or a buy-sell agreement. Generally speaking, I know how painful this may seem to you and seem ridiculous, but you really should have lawyers. You do the agreement yourself, but you really should have lawyers representing both sides. Is what I believe in the end. So you really need document. Now, what does this document have, and what's this document all about? The document has to have a description of the roles each of you, or any of you, there could be 2, 3, or 4 of you or more, the roles you're going to play, what pay you're going to receive, how it's going to be calculated, what equity you're going to have, who you're going to report to, what your title is, how to resolve disagreements, what to do in the event of death or disability of one of the partners, or what to do about family entering the business, or God knows what else. You really need to have all these things spelled out in this agreement. There is a wonderful case I used in my class called Serendipity. It's a Harvard case. It's about 2 partners who form a 50-50 business and screw it up. It's got some interesting things in it. It's got sexual harassment, and that it was way ahead of its time 25 years ago. But the case is really about partners, and it's really about what happens when a partnership does not, because they were such good friends, did not feel the need for a written agreement. I can give you cases over and over and over again. Gael Alcalay is a Columbia MBA who spoke in my class a number of times, who was the first winner of the Lang Prize, got $250,000 to start her business from Columbia. Took on a partner, a high school friend, disaster, nothing in writing. He held her up and almost destroyed the business. I'll go on and on with stories, but it's all about having everything in writing. And if you learn one thing today, it's that when you form a partnership, it gets formed in writing, and it covers as many of the subjects as you can think about at the outset. And ideally, each party, if it's a serious business, could and should have its own representation in that agreement. I know it doesn't make you feel comfortable, but this is not about feeling comfortable. This is about doing it right. So now let's talk about whatever came next. I don't remember. The guy with the money makes the rules. Oh boy. You know, there are stories of businesses, and there's so many, but I'll give you one. A friend of mine was an investor in the Montreal Expos baseball team, and in Canada. He owned a minority interest. I think it was under 30%. Team wasn't doing well. Baseball wasn't the sport in Canada. Hockey was. So the team needed more money over the years. He put in more and more money. He put in so much money because the others either didn't have it or didn't want to risk it, that he became the majority partner. And he then took over the team, made the rules, sold the team, bought the Miami Marlins, and made $1 billion before he sold it. So my point is that you may be partners, but the guy with the money makes the rules. There was in the famous Facebook story, if you remember from Social Network, the movie, great business movie. Eduardo's family came up with the money to save Facebook. Eduardo extracted nothing. He was the guy with the money. He should have ruled, and it probably should have been Eduardo today and not Zuckerberg. But the guy with the money has the right to make the rules. And Eduardo got stepped on. But the truth is, I've seen it all. A young fellow in my class started a business, an app. Had a guy who wanted to invest $250,000 on the condition that he would be chairman of the company for life. So why did he say that? Because he had the money that was necessary to start the business, and money talks. So if you are a partner and you're, let's say, and I don't recommend this, you're equal partners and you're a third each, and money is needed, and one guy's rich uncle comes up with the rest of the money, he could wind up taking over the business from the other guys. So just beware that whoever has the money can make the rules. Investors are all business. They're not your friends. So investors are not partners. They're just investors. And don't ever assume that they care about you or your business, and especially if they're professional investors. Here is another very important rule. Avoid 50-50 partnerships. Okay, 50-50 partnerships are dangerous. They could be 2 and 2 or 1 and 1. There are countless stories about them. You try to avoid them. You can't always avoid them. My own son, a Columbia MBA, was in a 50-50 partnership. It's because it just had to be. It was the only way he was going to get it done. But when you do a 50-50 partnership, there is something you can do. And I had a speaker in my class years ago, a guy named Jerry Schaefer, founded a company called Kettle Cuisine. And he founded it with another guy. They were 50-50. They both invested a tremendous amount of money. And it was a real drag in the beginning. And Jerry wanted out. So he had in his written agreement that there would be what's called a Dutch auction. And in any 50-50, you always have a Dutch auction. And that's why you need this stuff in writing. And that enables one partner, the partner who wants to get out or wants a change, the partner who initiates it, and in this case, it was the fellow who spoke in my class. He wanted out. He had mortgaged his home. He had run up his credit cards as far as he could go. He was done. So what the first partner does is come up with the amount. The first partner comes up with a number. You pick a reasonable number because the second partner gets the choice of whether he wants to buy the business or be bought out. And that is fairness because it makes the first partner come up with a reasonable number. Jerry came up with a reasonable number and a low number because he wanted to be bought out. Surprise, the partner also wanted to be bought out and accepted that number, and Jerry got stuck with the business and had to come up with the money. But that's what we call a Dutch auction. That's what you do when you have a 50-50 situation. The next important thing I'm going to tell you is vest all equity. So the best example I could give you is I had 3 students, 2 gals and a guy, who formed a business, and they were very excited about it. They did their business plan in class. They were terrific kids. They formed the business, and one of them moved off to California, and he told the other 2, it was the he told the other 2, I really can't participate in the business anymore. And they said, okay, well then you're out. And he said, yeah, I'm out, but I own 1/3 of the business. And they said, yes, you own 1/3 of the business, but the business isn't worth anything. He said, well, I think it's worth anything. And he basically held them up for, I don't know, $50,000 or whatever the number was. They came to their old professor, me, as the moderator, and I said, you idiots, why didn't you do a written agreement? And why didn't you vest equity like I told you? And the answer was, well, we were all good friends. We're not good friends now. And we mediated it, we got it settled, but what they should have done was vested the equity. So they were only 3 months into this thing when he wanted to quit. That would have left him with 0 equity, and he would have been gone and gotten what he deserved. So if there's a few of you start a business, even if you're giving 20% to your financial guy or your technical guy, vest it. Vest your equity. Everybody's equity gets vested 3 years, 4 years. 3 years is plenty. That means after a year, you've earned 1/3 of the equity. After 2 years, you've earned 2/3. After 3 years, okay, it's your equity, and if you leave, they got to buy you out. But you don't have someone leave after a month or 2 and get 1/3 of the business and carry it for life. You don't do that. And one of the founders of Keurig spoke in my class, Dick Sweeney, and he told the story of the 3 founders of Keurig. And fortunately, they vested equity because one of them retired after a month when the company was valued at 9 million, not 9 billion. So vest all equity. Read my lips. Next.
I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second to ask everyone to mute on Zoom. I hear a little bit of background noise.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't give out small amounts of stock. You can give options, but don't give anyone stock. When I say anyone, I mean anyone who's not a partner. Don't give a point or a half a point or 2 points to somebody just because they did a good thing. Why? Well, it doesn't mean that much to the individual. You can give options or other things. It has no rights, a minority interest in a company, but it does have the right to sue. You can be sued by somebody who's a 1% holder. The 1% is illiquid. A minority share in a private company ain't worth very much. So I would, beware of that. It doesn't usually mean as much to the individual who gets it as the equity does to the owners, the real owners. And I'll give you an example of why it's dangerous. So 2 of my friends had a 50-50. One of them was my friend. Had a 50-50 partnership for many years, very successful. They owned a financial business. And one day, after many, many years of being business partners and making lots of money, the other partner came to my friend and said, you know what, the trader, Trader, the head trader is, he's as important as both of us are. We ought to really give him some of the business. And they thought about it. They talked about it. They debated the pros and cons. And they gave the trader 5% of the business. They gave him a minority interest in the business. So they prepared the paperwork. The day the trader got his 5%, he came in, he thanked them. And he and the other partner advised my friend that he was now fired. He was fired because they had 52.5% of the company, and the other partner had 47.5% of the company. And by the rules, They had majority control of the company. There was no board. And he was fired. And he did get fired. And the business got dissolved because he gave away a few shares trying to be a good guy. So I've given an extreme example, but think long and hard before you give out small shares. Next, avoid equality of ownership. You know, 3 Columbia MBAs come to me. We're starting a business. There's 3 of us. We're going to each own 33%. No way. No way. I'm going to give you a way to deal with that. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But let's just say you do not do things equally because that's the easy way out. It's never quite equal. It's what each partner deserves. Okay, it's not equality. And it takes a little guts to avoid it. Avoid equality of pay. Just because you own a company doesn't mean you manage it. And just because you're partners and you work there doesn't mean all the partners draw the same amount of money. Huge mistake made by almost every Columbia MBA who starts a business. They start a business, they get all these partners, the partners all get equal pay. Mistake, mistake, mistake. You get paid based on what you're worth to the industry, to the company, not based on the fact that you happen to own 1/3 of the stock. What's next there? We're going to kind of move on to the next thing. So being partners with friends, dangerous. Hey, being partners with family is dangerous too. Doesn't mean it's always bad. It just means that, you know, it's something that's got more inherent risk than not being partners with a friend. However, you'll find that partnerships do build friendships, very, very common. They strengthen friendships and create them. My last comment is just a very obvious comment. In a partnership, you spend, I don't know, 10, 12 hours a day with your partner over all kinds of subjects and topics. And you know, other than going out for a drink, you don't get some of the rewards. So what I'd like to talk to you about now, if you could put up the slide on the Partners Equity worksheet, is a solution for how do you deal with how much equity to give each partner. And I came up with this really in desperation because people kept asking me, well, if it's not 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, what do we do? How do we do it? So I came up with this little worksheet, and the worksheet basically has a total of 100 points. And you take whether you have 2, 3, or 4 partners, and you look to each. I picked 10 categories. You could pick 10 different categories, but many students have used my categories. And I picked these categories and gave points, had the partners sit down together and give points for each of the categories with it's like a boxing match with a mandatory 10 points. So who had the idea for the business? Well, they all point to partner A, partner number 1. It was his idea. Well, he gets all 10 points. Who's the CEO? Well, partner 3 is the CEO. Okay, we'll give him 10 points. Who pitched to investors? Well, 3 of us did. All right, give us 3.3 points each. Who's putting up the sweat equity, working in the business while the other 2 of us are still at Goldman Sachs? Well, points are given for those who have sweat equity. Who's working full-time? I very often find that people in startups are working part-time. Some are and some aren't, because one of them has a good paying job and the other may not. Who would be the toughest to replace? Who deals with the banks, investors, lawyers, and boards? Okay, who's most vital to selling? Who's most vital to development? And who does the hiring? those are the categories I picked. You could pick other categories based on the nature of the business. Come up with a 100-point scoring system, and when you get done, you give totals for each. And if you put up the next slide, which is a sample of some of my students who did this, who were starting up a business, you can see that Joni Mehta, Jeff Park, Andy Germ, Nir Pengas started a business in class. It was Joni's idea, and he was the driving force behind the business. And you see what the little calculation that they did came up with. And they actually started the business based on this calculation, because nobody knows what to do. Mehta knew it was his idea. Should I have 50%, 60%, 40%? Well, I tried to come up with a little way they could justify it to each other. If they didn't like the categories, they could have changed the categories. So you'll note they also had a board of advisors. So I'm going to move. Which time do I have? I'm going to move very quickly to talk to you about directors. So I just want to touch on the topic of directors, because we talk about partners and I want to talk about boards. And the important thing I want to tell you is you don't need a board. When you start a company, you do not need a board of directors. There is no requirement on earth for a private company to have a board of directors. The board could be you. The board could be two of you. The board could be anybody you want, but there's not a requirement. So why do people all start these companies and create boards? Well, you got to be careful when you create a board, because the board has real sway in a company and can fire the CEO.
Sorry, can you all make sure you're on mute? I'm hearing some background conversation.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
So, we really, I just want to touch on this briefly. While there's no requirement to have a board, you may want a board for a variety of reasons. You may want a board if your investors insist on a board, if your lenders insist on a board. You may want a board because the board would be helpful in raising money for you. You may want a board because you're not experienced, or you may want them on the board for their specific experience in a certain field. You may want a board to force you to be disciplined, just like you write a business plan to force yourself to be disciplined. You may want a board to kind of be there so that they keep you focused on the things that you have to be focused on. You may want a board to deal with family issues. Definitely, if you have a family business, you want a board to oversee family arguments or issues. You may want a board if you're going to be preparing ultimately for an IPO. You may want a board for advice or control on compensation if you have multiple partners. You may want a board to help raising money. Yeah, you may want a board to give credibility to outside investors. You may want a board if for no other reason than to combat the loneliness of a CEO. There are lots of reasons to have a board. But just remember that a board has lots of power. In a private company, you can get D&O insurance for board members, which is important. And in a private company, boards are quite different. Board still has a fiduciary responsibility to look out for the shareholders, okay, not necessarily the partners. And in a private company, you typically have 4 board meetings a year, maybe 2 phone calls a year. And in a startup, you pay board members with equity, minimal equity. I mean, the whole board would never get more than a couple points of equity, never. but startup companies generally don't have cash. So if they really need a board, they may give them X shares, but not a lot. If it's a ongoing private company, well, then the last thing they want to do is give shares. If you own a business, I'm on a board. I have a board meeting on Tuesday in Fort Lauderdale. It's a board of a couple $100 million company. It's privately owned by two brothers. They pay me in cash. A startup would pay me in equity. An ongoing business would pay me in cash. Some would use a combination. If it's cash, you're talking, depending on the size of the business, but it's certainly tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands to be on a board, even a private board. So an alternative to a board is an advisory board. Many companies that I'm involved in may have a medical advisory board, and they may have a business advisory board, and they may have advisory boards for different things, and they may give a few options to someone to be on the advisory board, which is very common. I was offered to be on an advisory board of a company called Kiva in Boston years ago, and I turned them down because they didn't give me enough equity, and they wound up selling the company to Amazon for $1 billion, and I made a mistake, but that happens. So I've just mentioned boards because boards have risks. I can tell you one little board story, and then I'm going to open this up to questions. One little board story is a very dear friend who owned 13 large apartment buildings in Manhattan, worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. With his wife, they were 50-50 partners. They had a board. They've been divorced for 30 years. He ran the business. They had two daughters. One daughter is very famous, who would know, fashion person. And the other daughter worked for Warner Lambert. There was no heir to the business. The husband, who was my friend, ran it for 30 years. The wife just collected half the money. It was a huge business. He convinced his daughter, who he was very close to come into the business. She did come in. It took her 2 years. She learned the business. She was smart. She learned it well. She hadn't spoken to her mother in 25 years, but was very close with her father. And at one point, her father said to her, we have 4 people on the board, two from your mother, 2 from me. I'd like, you deserve, and you've earned the right to be on the board. I'd like to put you on the board. And she said, great, thanks. He put her on the board. No sooner did he put her on the board, she sided with her mother and fired her father. So there are no end to stories like these.